Hi everybody, I'm Brian. Thanks very much for having me. Thanks to Robin for inviting me. Let me just get this started here. All right, so, and does this work? Flip-flop? Yeah, all right. So I'm Brian. I'm talking today about injecting context into Redux when you have a connect function. We'll get into this. Basically, they're often talked about as competing state management tools. There's a variety of ways to describe what Context API is doing. Obviously, Redux is a state management tool. I'm going to talk about combining these two, and I'll just jump right in. So just briefly about me, yeah, I've said my name several times now. I'm from Austin, Texas. I don't know if there's anybody from Texas here today or tomorrow, but no Texas. Okay, well that's okay. Save your questions about guns and horses for later. That's not really. Anyway, so I attended Spice Coding Bootcamp. I graduated in February this year. I got a lot of Spice people here today, so that's great. I studied philosophy and I was a musician for a while. So yeah, I've never played for an audience this large, so that tells you something about code versus music. But anyway, I work at advertising DSP Jaduda GmbH here in Berlin. We're hiring. We're looking for a React developer. So if you're unemployed, please come talk to me. I'm very interested in talking to you about React. I work in React all day. I love React. Yeah, I'm very motivated about this. Also, if you have a commercial interest, we are an advertising company, so do come talk to us about that as well. All right. So first things, I've got a number of diagrams. You're going to see this like egg shape. I mean, it's not actually, it's a circle, but it looks kind of like a fried egg. And yeah, this will be a component, so if you can't see at the back, I think it should be legible, but this will be a component throughout the presentation. There are no hooks involved, but anyway. All right, so Redux, yeah, hooks are coming, but hopefully, we'll still have this comprehensive state management thing happening. I don't want to talk about Redux too much. I'm sure many of you have been using it for a while. I was talking to Thomas earlier, and they stopped using it. So I might be a day late, dollar short, but I've only been coding for a little while. So anyway, what's good about Redux? It's a global single source of truth. It has all this boilerplate that actually usually forces you to write some pretty good code for state management, and it has these great dev tools we all know and love. If you are not as familiar with Redux and you'd like to discuss that with me afterwards, I would love to talk about it with you. I've got this diagram, so here we go. This is a visual representation of what Redux does for your app. You have the, as we all know and love, the top-down data flow of a React app where the component hierarchy, data travels down, events emit upwards. Redux store circumvents that, or Redux circumvents that. It still works in a similar way, but you know what I'm saying, right? You can, this component can talk to the Redux store, and it can pass something to this component and other neighboring components, and you can traverse the tree in lots of nice ways. I guess, you know, you can, what am I trying to say? People have differing opinions about how this should look, but I think this is the agreed upon structure to some degree. So that's the structure that I'm using. We're going to move on with that. Context, this other API. Hooks might very well replace this, but that's okay. We'll see. This is a kind of a backward-looking talk, but we can, maybe these same concepts will still be of interest to you once hooks come out. So with context, you determine the API. You have the context consumer. The consumer has to use the render props pattern, but other than that, you can really, your state management is however you would like it to be. You can have overlapping concerns. You can mix and match multiple contexts within one another, and it's native to React. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'm a little nervous. So this is a code example. If you're not familiar with context, because I've got to take this other places as we go forward. So you have to, you know, you have the provider, you can pass in a value, you can step multiple ways down the tree, access the consumer, and you get that piece of context later on, further down the tree. Okay, and here's another of my diagrams that explains what this looks like. I hope you like it. The colors are, I looked around on the internet and there wasn't that many good diagrams, so yeah. No offense to anyone out there who's made nice diagrams or anything, but yeah, so this is my interpretation of what Context API provides you. You have providers, which basically any of the components that come further down the hierarchy have access to whatever you put into that provider. That doesn't just have to be static pieces of state. It can be methods which mutate that piece of state, and on and on and on. Many of you have probably read about this, or many of you are probably actually using this. But let's go on. All right, so I'm not going to do this, but if you type in Redux and Context, you actually don't have to type verses. You just type in both at the same time, and you'll get all of these articles that's like Redux versus Context. Really, you have to decide which one, and of course, most of the writing that you find on Medium and on the internet and stuff is actually pretty sober, which is nice. People usually come to the same conclusion that these aren't competing technologies. They're two technologies that you can use in different scenarios, and they both have their pros and cons, right? Conflicts abound. I don't buy that. And here we're going to see that they are mature technologies in harmony. Most people agree that texts are each useful in their own way, and here's an example of using them together that plays to each text's strengths. All right, so we got an app. So we want to add a feature to our app, right? And we add additional components to this feature, right? And it adds more components and more components, and then we add another feature. We add a further feature. Sorry, that guy's fired. Whoever wrote that, but okay. So that's a React app, right? You got feature, feature, and feature, and you can structure that however you like. But let's just take it with one feature, okay? And then, well, what if we want to manage our state? We don't want to use the top-down data flow, so we have one feature and we want to wire it up to the Redux store. Well, okay, so far so good. You can definitely do that. There's no reason why you can't. Well, we're going to use an example here today of a counter. I mean, many of you have seen this. The Redux docs use counter a lot. And let's see. Scroll over here. And sure enough, I've got a counter. Can you believe it? I actually programmed a counter. And this works. This is what you would expect. It goes up and down. Can everyone see that back there? All right. So it goes up and down. You can reset it. This is, you're just going to have to take my word for it so I can move along. But this is wired up with Redux. Even though it's really simple, it is wired up with Redux. So, and it has this, actually, well, look, I'll just show you. It has this basic structure, right? A display, increment, decrement button, reset button. I know it's contrived. It has extra features that you wouldn't normally do, but that's all right. And so that's what it looks like, right? But maybe you want to reproduce that feature and you want to have more than one of them, right? And the Redux people figured this out. They already knew about this, and it's in their docs. But first, some example scenarios where you might want to repeat your state. You have chat boxes in a chat application. You have tables of similar entities but different roles. So when you have chat boxes, like you're just repeating the same bit of logic, and you want to be reusing that logic, but you have to identify if there's any reason why you might want to store the state of those chat boxes in your Redux store, then you have to be identifying what these objects are. I'm getting ahead of myself, right? But so tables are similar entities with different roles. So you can think of, you have like several tables that have like team players in them and team personnel, but you want to keep them separate. You don't want actually these tables to be the same component, right? Or teachers, students, and staff, you might use very similar components, but you're breaking these up into different sections: cars, trucks, and motorcycles on like a used automobile website. Another example I thought of is any subform with a flexible instance count. Like if you're filling out like a tax document, you have to declare how many children you've got, but some people have 0 children, some people have hundreds of children, some number of children. So you have to, if you're building a web app which uses this, then you have repeated bits of form. Obviously with a form, you're submitting all of that state together. It's better if that state is pushed up to some higher element. There's even, there's Redux form, which is a library that's useful for this, and yeah. So these are examples where you might want to have reproduced components that use reproduced reducer logic, where it's very important that the component state is not shared, right? Okay. Ooh. That might look something like this. Oh yeah. Okay. So now we got 3 features, and we got a Redux store that's serving all 3 of these. Except you got a big problem, right? Redux doesn't know what the difference between any of these are unless you tell Redux that they are different. Redux thinks that they're all the same. If you emit the same action from this one, it won't know the difference and will update. And if you're asking this one is asking for a piece of state from your Redux store, it won't know which of the 3 features you're actually referring to unless you namespace these 3 features separately, and unless you are actually these components, if they're dispatching actions to the Redux store, they have to say, hello, I'm feature A, or I'm feature B, I'm feature C, and of course, if you don't do that, you get this jumbled mess, which, and that's literally what happens. Oh man, I keep going the wrong way. And so here we have 3 counters. Can you all still see that? That's like material UI, but it's kind of broken, you see. And if I push button here, that doesn't work very well. I can reset, but oh, it resets all of them. What a shame. This counter app will never serve anyone. But so that is the situation. That's the problem that I had at work. It was much more complicated than that, but you might see which way this is going now. So let's imagine in our brains that we have, okay, so now we have to split the state up into 3 different things, right? This is a simplified example, but we can't just have one state. They have to have 3 different states, right? And it's a function that you can find in the Redux docs. Again, it's probably familiar to some of you people. But this is a way to reproduce reducer logic, right? So here you have a switch that takes different action types, and this one returns a state +1, this returns state -1. And actually, you see here that you can call this function, generate this switch statement, which generates a reducer logic for each one of your counters. And sure enough, you can combine these using combined reducers. This creates 3 different pieces of state that can be updated separately. But you see that now you have to carry this name property with your action. You have to carry this name property with your action. So suddenly, any action that you're going to emit, if it's increment or decrement or anything like this, you have to carry this name property with it. So that's pretty cool. And so now we have this counter app, and we have this. Well, that's the counter. That's actually the counter element, right? But that's not going to work anymore. We have to update this. Now we have to pass this name property down. And then, oh yeah, sure enough, in the increment button, now we have to call for this prop as well inside the increment button and pass that to the action when we dispatch the action. And we can do that. We certainly can do that. And of course, that does bring the counter to a functioning state. And what's cool about that is that because we still use the Redux global store, we can delete all, or we can manipulate the global state these are not separated. You could have separate Redux stores that would be independent from one another, but actually you can. This is still just one Redux store, and that means we can have 3 different pieces of state. These can be managed by their own set of reducers. Actually, all of the reducers are being run through each time, but then you can reset all of them at the same time. So that's pretty cool, but we still have this kind of nasty. We're passing all these props down. Why? I mean, that's kind of a pain, right? We don't want to be doing that. What about context? We can use context to circumvent this issue, right? In fact, oh man, this is a nice one. I like the colors on this. So this is the last diagram. Yeah, but you see what I'm going for here now. This is what it came to mind. Is that we're going to use context to name these different features. So the context is passing the name. It just comes as an argument to the context, and it implicitly passes. Well, not implicitly yet. We'll see what we have to do, because as we know, if we want to get to the context, the simplest version of that API is to use a consumer and pull that piece of state out of that consumer. And sure enough, we can do that. So we're looking at another example of code. We've done the typical React thing. We're now doing a map to return each of the counters, and we're passing the name into the provider for each of the counters, right? So please stop me if I'm going. Well, don't stop me. I just keep going. But I hope I'm not going too fast for people. But anyway, so then we have the consumer, and sure enough, we're pulling out the name from our context, and we're passing this now to the action that we dispatch. But this is hideous, right? I mean, who wants to work with a? I'm sorry if you've written code like this before, but look how many. We have to add 1, 2, 3, 4 more lines, and this is what hooks is meant to improve and stuff. But anyway, it's not that hideous. I really like this API, but if you have to do this, and what you imagine, this is increment button, decrement button, reset button, and the display, and they all have to get access to this context. This is not a happy solution. right? And then it also creates this other problem. This doesn't work very nicely with Redux, because if you want to pass the context to map state to props has to it has to pull from own props if it wants to get access to the context, which means that you can't pass the consumer inside the render function of that component. You have to pass it before, and of course you can encapsulate this in its own component. But so basically, if you want to get context into your map state to props or map dispatch to props, you can inject it in two different places, which is confusing. Why would you? I mean, that's anyway. So these are the problems I ran into at work, and this is what drove me to a solution. All right, it's warm up here. It's cold in Berlin, but it's warm up here. All right. Okay, so this is my conclusion. These solutions are cumbersome. Cumbersome, I mean, challenging, pain in the butt. But anyway, all our goals were, we wanted to store a feature state in Redux. We wanted to reproduce that feature, and by extension, we wanted to reproduce its state. We had to, otherwise we have to, sorry. Otherwise you have this other problem, right? Where you have the counters and they're all updating simultaneously. And we wanted to, so that's part 3. We needed to identify each feature to Redux so Redux would know which state to update. All right, so here's what we're going to do. This is the solution, all right? We emulate Redux's connect function. We thunkify map state to props and map dispatch to props. I'm not sure I'm using that word properly, but hopefully you'll get what I mean. We're going to wrap these, and then we're going to pass these to Redux's own connect function. We add context to the render of the higher order component that our connect returns. We call the thunked map state and map dispatch to props functions inside the higher order component, and we inject our context as an argument. And then we pass the returned props to our wrap component. Right? Is that might be okay? We're going to go into the code now. All right. So this is what it looks like. You got this connect function. It's got the same signature as Redux Connect. And we have to mock these, right? Because if we want to mock I've learned a lot about Redux in preparation for this, but if you pass null in the first argument slot for Redux, right, it still works. But if you pass null to this function without this line of code, you'll get a problem. We could also have prop types in this. I understand all that. I haven't added that in here, but anyway, the point is we need to make sure that we're getting that we have flexibility with the first 3 arguments, and that the merge props function, we need to use that default, because of course Redux is using the merge props default function every time you connect a component, right? Which is there at the bottom. All right, and we're going to wrap these dispatch functions, map dispatch to props and map state to props. I called this thunkifying. Please correct me if I'm wrong about that afterwards. But and you can see that we're returning an object with the property Redux Actions. We're calling map dispatch to props, and then this is the function that we're passing to the Redux function. Same with map state. We have to wrap that in a function, or how can I say it? Yeah, we have to wrap the map state to props function in a function, because map state to props is called on render. Map dispatch to well, actually, how can I say that? You get the state on render. Dispatch happens due to an event that happens later, so it's kind of confusing. But anyway, you only have to write this once, whereas the other solutions you would have to write them every time you add a new feature to your component or anything like this. The component, this is the higher order component that my connect function returns. You can see that it uses a local context consumer. This is, we're using a bit of context consumer. This is passing in a context, and then we're calling this function. We're calling this function, and then we're returning the wrap component with all of those props. Yeah, and then this is vaguely what it looks like. I'm cutting a lot of it out because it ends up being quite a long function. And then this is what it looks like. This is what happens on the other side. Once your component is rendering, you're pulling the Redux Actions and get Redux state properties off of the props, which we created earlier. We're calling the get Redux state, because now we have the context here. We're calling get Redux state with the context, which means that we're evaluating whatever your map state to props function was previously. It will be evaluated with the context object included in the own props argument to that function, right? And then dispatch props, we're mapping, we're looping through the map dispatch to props properties and redefining them where they're taking not only the payload but also the context as an argument. Right? We're returning the state props, the dispatch props, and the rest, which are the normal props, which is exactly what a connect function would return. Well, it's exactly what the what the merge props function in a normal Redux function would take. All right. Ooh, right. Oh, I'll go back to that later. Okay, so this is what this looks like. Here we've got a triple counter, and we're using the three different, we're using context throughout this app. Show you what it looks like, right? It's kind of hard to see, but also I don't know how to use Mac very well. But you can see that here we have local context consumer. This is passing the name. It's calling the action. This, these counters work, right? But we're doing this actually in all of them. Local context consumer, the reset button. We're also pulling in the local context consumer to differentiate these different counters from each other, make sure that the actions fire correctly. All right? Actually, you mind holding this for a second while all right. All right, so what I'm going to do is, here is this massive function that I was talking about earlier. Actually, if you want to see what it looks like, this is what the whole thing looks like all together. I'll kind of quickly scroll through it, but I'm showing this to people. I hope that you guys find this interesting or something. I don't know. This is. I don't know. If you took this, we're at an open source event here. If you took this, it might break more things than it helps in your project. I don't know, but maybe you find it interesting, and we can build on. Maybe we can build on this. I don't know. I'll come back around to why I think this is a good idea at the end. But anyway, look, watch. So this is the whole function altogether. This mocks the connect function, replaces it, and I hope that you find this interesting, what I'm about to do here. So I'm going to select all of this code. I'm going to comment that in, right? So now, this is from the same file that we're exporting this context. We're also exporting this connect function, right? So we got it's in a working state. All of the counters are using the context. Now we're going to go through here and we're going to refactor these things. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to not that. I'm going to delete this connect function from Redux. And I'm going to stop importing this local context. I'm going to delete the reference to the local context. And I'm also going to delete this name property that we were, can I save that? Yeah, we don't need that to be an object anymore. Request error, get banned, come on. All right, that was the increment button. Does it work? Sure it does. Huh? Oh, it's okay, it's just like a few more lines. So, all right. That was the increment button. We got the reset button. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to import my connect function. Get rid of this context. Get rid of this. Jeez, yeah. Save that. It doesn't, I'm not connected to the internet. That's what, I see what you're saying, all right. And so let's see, does the reset button still work? Sure enough. Sorry, I'm having trouble with the UI here. All right. Here in this case as well, we're just getting rid of this stuff. We don't need it anymore. And of course, if you pass that name now, it'll break it, but that's all right. And we import connect here. Get rid of that. Oh, sorry. All right. So, and the coup de grace, the display, right, which had this nasty bit of context here. Just get rid of that. Don't need to pass this property anymore. And then we go into this. Oh, where was that? Display. Where now? Oh shit. Yeah. Line 31? Oh, this is, yeah, no, this, I got it. No, this problem, actually, I have to, hang on a second. I have to import Redux inject context. This request error, sorry about all that. But anyway, yeah, so that's a refactor. All of these components. No, there's no extra brackets. But, yeah. All right. So that's what I did. That was the. Is there really an extra back? Oh well. Look, the thing worked, right? So, all right. So yeah. To close up, sorry I took you guys on that long path through all that code. I hope that was verständlich. I'm sure some people in this room were. That might have been review for some people. It's basically a higher order component pattern where I just integrated the higher order component with the connect function. It simplifies some things. You don't have to think about it. And the point, I just want to return to this. This is the problem I was trying to solve. We have that Redux does not know the difference between which one of these features is which. And my solution, the solution that I showed here, doesn't. How do I say that? It identifies these implicitly without changing anything about your code. Now, there's some issues with it, I'm happy to discuss those. But yeah, so that's it for me. Wait, I got one more slide. Come on, show it. Thank you.